Hi, this is Joe Ferroch, and welcome to Tech Chef. This is a series where we try and break down some more complicated topics and make them more accessible to the layperson. Now, don't let my appearances fool you. I've actually been around for a while now. I had my first Commodore personal computer, a PET, back in the 80s. I migrated to a VIC-20, a Commodore 64, and onward and upward from there. Today we're going to be tackling the subject of migrating the UPS tracker to OAuth2 and some of the struggles and difficulties in doing that. Hopefully you'll learn something along the way, and if you like this, you can suggest additional topics for me to cover in the future. So without any further ado, let's get going. The first item on our recipe checklist is to make sure that we are set up with a UPS developer account. We can get there by going to the ups.com website. We can scroll down to the bottom and look for the UPS developer portal. We are met with the ominous warning that is the subject of today's discussion. It's talking about how the token access is going away, and you'll have to start using the API interface with OAuth2 starting June 3rd of 2024. We have a list of APIs that are available to us, some that are free and some that cost money. For our purposes, the ones that we will be using for tracking are free. I've already set up and I have an application that's already defined along with the client ID and the client secret. If we look at my example application, we can see the client ID and client secret that's encoded here for obvious reasons. And we can see some of the APIs that I've signed up for and been approved for. The tracking, the locator, the authorization, those are essential really for our needs. Address validation is probably a good one to have. Note that the status here is approved, so there is a bit of a vetting that takes place with UPS, but it's pretty quick. I still wouldn't delay on getting that set up. Once I have that established, we will need the client ID and client secret, and we'll have to encode those in base64. In order to do that, we can go to the base64 encode decode website. There we can type in our client ID and client secret. And the key here is that you've got to insert a colon in between the two, and that's not intuitively obvious when reading through the UPS documentation. For our purposes, I'm just going to put garbage here for the client ID and client secret, and then I'm going to encode it, and we will see our encoding here. This will be used later on with our Power Automate application. And we are going to manually trigger the flow. Now, you are greeted with the Copilot interface. I'm not a fan. Thankfully, we can disable that for now by just clicking the toggle. We will add an input for the tracking number, just text. Next, we're going to want to set up an HTTP request, but in order to do that, let's go back to the UPS developer portal and look at the API definition. Jumping back now, we can just click on the authorization OAuth documentation from the API catalog. And what we'll note here is that there's two methods that are discussed here. One is a redirect where you can have an application that's set up. For example, you may want to hide somebody's user ID and password in case you're building out a true application, for example. That's not what we're going to be doing for this particular example. We're going to be generating a token. We're going to press the easy button here. So we scroll down to the second method on creating a token. Here we see our endpoint. There's two endpoints that are defined by UPS, one's for testing and one's for actual production. Here are the items of interest. We see that the content type is application X, the URL encoded. We see the grant type is client credentials, and we see that the accept is the application JSON. We'll need our merchant ID, which is also set up when we created our account, and you can reference that from your own UPS developer account. Okay, so we know that too, this is a post command, and that's going to be important. So let's jump back to Power Automate. Let's go ahead and try and put that into play. So we look up HTTP, we see that it's a premium connector. Hopefully that won't scare people off. Most people with an enterprise account can do this. And if you can't, you can sign up for a Office 365 demo account and try this out. You may be able to start this off temporarily, or you may have to jump to Postman or some maybe Python, for example. But for our purposes, we're going to assume that you get the premium HTTP connector in your Office 365 environment. We're going to click on that. We noted previously that that's going to be a post, and the production URI is this address here, the online tools UPS security v1 auth token. Again, we taking note of the authorization, and this was going to be our base 64 encoding and decoding from the previous example. I've got to regenerate that, and again it's just garbage. This is the actual decode, so let's go back and we'll use that. Going back to here, we can do the basic and we put the code in there. We've got the X merchant ID, and again I'm just going to put garbage here for my own purposes. Content type, if I can spell. We know from there that it was the URL encoded. I'm going to cheat and cut and paste that, and then we have our accept, which is application JSON. In the body, we will type in the grant type of client, client equals client credentials. That should do it. I'm going to save this, and then I'll hide this and put my own credentials, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, I've entered my credentials, and I'm going to, always a good habit here is to rename these things so other people can understand what you're doing. So you may understand what you're doing later, 3 months from now, when you're asked to make some enhancements to this. Of course, this is just a demo, but you get my point. You certainly want to get in the best habit of naming things so that you can understand what in the world's going on. That's another reason I don't like the designer, by the way, is because it comes up with these generic names that really aren't useful, especially when you have to maintain something. Of course, you can change it with the new designer, but again, I'm old school at this point, and I don't like the change. And now that we've saved it, we can give it a test. We will do it manually, and because we haven't yet implemented the tracking number, it's not important. All we're doing is testing the token. We can just put garbage there, and she's off and running, and let's see if she crashes and burns. She does not. And we can see that we were able to get our token approved. This is great news. So now we can move on to the next step. We're going to copy the JSON that was provided. A shortcut here is just to click into the body of the message that was received, do a Control-A and a Control-C. From there, we're going to go to any of the JSON beautifiers that are out there. I chose this one. I don't know how they chose the name for this domain. Not intuitive at all. We are going to then beautify it. Basically, all we care about the access token that's part of this, and that it's approved ultimately. We're going to look for the access token and dereference that from the JSON that's received. We will edit our flow. We will introduce a new step to parse the JSON, and we will have the output of our request that went to the post, and we will generate, we still have this cached in, and we will generate our JSON. And when we go to the next step, we should have that, because it wasn't a complicated JSON, we should have the token. So let's just do a quick compose and grab that token that was parsed out of here, the access token, because we're going to need that. Again, let's stick with our naming convention here. Let's say access token, and here we will change this to parse JSON, and we will call this the OAuth2 token response. And we will save that. And now that we have our token, we will go back and look at the API endpoint for the UPS for the tracking. We will look for it. Here's the tracking. We go to the documentation. Now, interestingly enough, when I went to this, I realized that they actually changed the endpoint. Since I used this last, they must have grandfathered what I have been using up until now. It looks like we can use either, but we will be consistent with the example that they provided now. And so here we can see, I've already expanded this, we can see this is their test environment and this is the production environment. We can see the syntax. It's using the get command, and I actually like the example that they provide here a little better because they have some side loading that's part of it. So let's grab that. Let's look and see. We've got the inquiry number, which is required, obviously. Locale, which has a default of English, US, at least in my zone where I'm recording this at. The return milestones, return signature. And so let's go back and let's do another call, an HTTP. So let's do that, HTTP. And we go to our premium connector and we will do get tracking update. Let's put that method in there. It's going to be it's a get, we know that. And the URI had to do the example that I cut and pasted there. We are going to use the dynamic content from the manual trigger of the flow finally. We'll back that out and we will look for the UPS tracking number and insert that there. Again, the side loading we're staying in, return milestone. I may want to come back for that, and I do like to have the milestones. But to avoid surprises while I'm recording this, we will keep it with that. We will put in the headers. We know that the content type is still the URL encoded. Cheating, obviously. I can't type that fast. Action ID we just want something unique here. And so what I do to make something unique is I will just use the expression with the ticks, UTC now, and we will use that to make something unique. Again, it doesn't really matter. Next, we have the transaction source, which was our merchant ID from when we got the token. So again, I'm just going to put bogus information for my own protection here. And then we will do the authorization where we insert our token. And the syntax there is bearer and the token that we grabbed. Actually, we could have forgo actually the compose there, but since we defined it already, let's go ahead and use it. And that should do what we want. So now we need to find a tracking ID to actually track. Let me go and I'm going to hide this, insert my actual details, and grab a tracking number and be right back. Okay, I have my tracking number and I updated my information. We're going to save this off and we're going to test it. And we're not going to do automatic because I put bogus information the first time I ran it. Let's put that tracking number and try it out and see if she crashes and burns. And she did. So let's have a look and see what happened here. Well, I was mistaken when I gave the example. The CIE is actually the testing environment, the test bed, and not the production. So let's go back and change that out. Let's go back here and the online tools tracking, let's just substitute this with our syntax, keep the rest. And yeah, that really was because I cut and pasted from the example that was there. We'll blame it on that. Let's save it, try it again. We can do automatically. with the tracking number that was there. And it cratered again, and this time with the URI that was indicated, the production URI. And so what I'm going to do is, it's a 404, so meaning that the endpoint's really not there. And so I've got to assume that their documentation is actually incorrect at this time. I'm going to go and copy what I had in my own testing and see what happens here. Let's try this simplified API call here. Note the difference here from what they have documented. Let's hope that wasn't causing the problem here. Let's try one more time. And we were successful. All right, so now we have the JSON, and it does have our status updates, I can see. So now we are going to want to do the parse on this JSON as well. Now, a little bit of foreshadowing here is that in my trial and error, when I set this up, I found out that there are certain fields in here that aren't always present, like city. When you do international shipping and that, UPS doesn't include city codes for whatever reason. So in effect, these are optional, but we want that information. So we're going to do a little bit of creative coding around that. Again, let's try and let's grab this JSON, do the Control A and the Control C, and we will go back to the JSON Beautifier. Insert the new, beautify it, and we will see some patterns emerge here. We get the tracking response, the shipment that's an array, the package, which is an array. For our purposes and for convenience, we are going to assume the array instance of 0 is the only package that we're interested in, which is the case with this testing. So track response, shipment, and package is what we're interested in. Then the activity. And this is an array that we are going to care about. Let's go back, and we're going to do a parse JSON. Let's close that up. We will edit this and add another parse JSON action. And we will, let's rename that to our tracking update. And remember how I mentioned back in the beautified JSON, in order to simplify things, the parse JSON's a great feature with Power Automate. But if you have multiple elements that are part of your JSON, it gets confusing really quickly. It will have multiple elements within the parsed JSON object, but it's very difficult unless you look at the underlying code to figure out which one it's referencing. So we're going to dereference. We're going to do the track response, shipment 0, package 0, and activity. And that's the array that we're going to focus on. We're going to use a select for this. So ultimately, and I'll explain why. So let's go back. So we are going to dereference part of this. We need to we'll get the body in here, but we need to, I'm going to cheat, highlight that and go into the expression, and you back out the curly brackets and the @ a little bit of a pro tip there. And now we want to dereference the other items that to get to the details that we're most interested in. That was the tracking response, the shipment. So I'm going to cheat here, and I will put this into the bottom. But remember, I said that we have the tracking response at the first level. We have the shipment, which is 0, element 0. Package also, which is, again, we're only looking at one package at a time, so we will use that. And now we want a modified schema, which is the activity itself. So we can just highlight a couple of those. and terminate it. Use that for our use. We will have to terminate the array and terminate the JSON. Add that at the top as well. Oops, delete that it likes to insert for us. And we've got our example. And now this is going to be the creative part. What we need to do is we wanted to use a select to take care of situations where some of the properties may not be available at all times. Again, this is speaking from experience here. I was the crash test dummy on this several times, and you will benefit from the bruises that I got from there. So let's do a select. Hopefully people are familiar that are watching this with the select operation. Select is really useful for renaming elements. The naming that's there in the JSON, this is your opportunity to make it something more meaningful for you. And it also allows you to do some handling of errors or missing content. So we'll do this, missing elements. And the first thing that we want to do is, I mentioned how that the city isn't always present. And so we're going to insert the activity there from the JSON. Remember it went into the array, and now we've got the activity, and the select goes through and renames all the entries in the array. So that's great. The first thing that we were interested in is the city, and that's the thing that's not always present. And so we're going to use some conditional logic here to try and combat this. And of course I cut and pasted there, but I'll show you what I did. So we use an if in there, and we look at the item, which is the reference inside the select, location, address, and if city is present, then we use that reference, the city reference. Otherwise, we use not applicable. I'm going to show that broken down a little better here for everyone's benefit. So this is the if logic. The first thing in there is that we're checking to make sure that the location address has an item named city, and if so, then it uses that city name. Otherwise, the else, it's going to say not applicable, and then terminates the if logic. So now we can populate the other items that aren't subject to change in my use of this, and we will use the parsed JSON here. We'll use the country code. We'll use the status type. Again, using the type in this case. We will do the status code, which is the status code. We'll use the date. And the last one where we have to conditionally format is the time, or at least I like to do it. And again, I've got some special logic for that, and I will share it with you. Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen. So here it is. We're going to use a concat with the substring of the item time. We are going to use the first, starting at the position 0, we're going to go into numbers. We're going to put in a semicolon. We are going to then put in the second set of digits and another colon, then the last set of digits without another colon, and then we'll close out the concat. So let's go ahead and enter that. Now we can do an HTML table from this so that we can send ourselves an email to see what happens. Let's go ahead and add an HTML table. We'll call it error correction. And it's that and much more. It's also doing the formatting We're just going to take the output of the select and do that. Another bonus thing here is if you just look at the HTML table that gets created here, it's pretty bland. So because we're going to send ourselves an email which supports HTML, we can put in some CSS styling. I'm going to do that. Let's do a compose. We'll call it our CSS style table. Our table style. And there's plenty of examples out there. Again, I'll share it with everyone in the bottom here if people want to take a nice snapshot of that. Nothing super unique about it, but it's just basically doing table formatting to make the borders and that look nice. Now we want to send ourselves an email. We will go there, subject, we will just call it test UPS shipment status. We will inserting the formatting here. We are going to put the output of both the CSS formatting. Of course, we want our table. And I will leave out my email for right now and pause the video and enter it, and we'll give it a test. Okay, I've entered it. We'll save it. Now, the interesting thing, of course, here is that because we've come up with a new action here, we've got to basically allow Power Automate. We will have to run this again and sign in and just hit continue, of course. We will put our tracking number back from when we began. With any luck, it succeeded. Let's go look at our email. From here, we can see our table. We have the city, and we can see that it's actually done one substitution when a city didn't exist. We see the country code, Spain, Germany, Netherlands, status type. We have the date, which could probably stand some reformatting as well, and then the time. So we have our one-off query using the OAuth2 formatting. So our job is complete. In the next session, I will be extending this to show how we can integrate this with both Zendesk and SharePoint lists so we can track the UPS tracking numbers. On a subsequent video from that, we can dive deeper and do queries of it to see what the status is and report updates to the ticket. Stay tuned, and thanks for watching.